Hello and welcome to another episode of Flying High with Flutter. I'm your host, allenwyma. And today I'm with Tom Gilder. This is how you say your name, right? I didn't actually ask you.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Make sure I said it correctly. He is the creator of Routemaster, or Routemaster, depends on, I guess, which part of the globe you're from. So I say route. I believe he says root.
I do, yes. It feels like I contradict people, though, all the time. It's
Yeah. I used to work in Shanghai before, and my boss was Dutch, and he would say router. And of course, I would say router, and it would make our staff member go crazy because she wasn't sure what it was that we're talking about.
Yeah.
Our friend, our mutual friend, is actually here with us in the chat saying hello.
Cool.
Navigator 2.0 master. That's what he calls you now. In any case, why don't you give a quick introduction about who you are and what is this project, the Routemaster, about, and why should we care about it?
Yeah. So I'm Tom. I am kind of the Flutter lead at like Rebel App Studio, but which is kind of part of Codemate. We've kind of started our own kind of sub brand to just concentrate on Flutter. I've been doing Flutter professionally for 3 years now here. Did like Xamarin development and other mobile stuff before that. And we've done lots of different projects in Flutter here, including things like Moi, which was one of the kind of first big Flutter web projects that was released to the public. I made a Navigator 2.0 package. It kind of came actually from Moi that I found a need for that, and when I couldn't find a package that did everything that we needed. So I ended up writing that in my own time. And it seems to have become quite popular, became a Flutter favorite, which I was like amazed about. That's a really nice kind of honor.
Actually, I do want to kind of talk a little bit about Navigator 2.0, right? So I tried to get some people to talk about this, but everybody keeps saying it's been talked too much. But to be honest, like I tried to follow most talks and I just still cannot follow. Like, it is wicked. I don't know, just nasty. I don't know how to say it. Like, I feel like the interface is just not fun. And like I watched about 2 videos about how to use it, just straight, Navigator 2.0. And I was just surprised about how not necessarily unintuitive, but just how complicated it was. And like they showed like a diagram and it was like a lot of components involved, right?
Yeah, it is, yeah. It's like, I think it's fair to say, that the Flutter team have kind of said this themselves, that it is a fairly low-level API. It's got to support lots of different scenarios, but yeah, it just isn't very developer-friendly at all. And it is very complicated. There are lots of moving parts. There are lots of kind of interfaces you need to implement and like classes you need to subclass, things like that. And it doesn't feel very Flutter-like. Like, I don't know if you got that kind of impression from it of like,
well, the thing that really made me feel upset, sorry to bust in, like I was a little bit upset because like I feel like in Flutter, we want to use stateless widgets, right?
Yeah.
But like what I understand is that if you want to use this, you have to make your material app, your like outermost shell, a stateful widget. And I was like, that just feels dirty to me, unless I understood something. But that was like all the examples was like that.
Yeah, and kind of the initial idea of it, I completely kind of see where it came from, of having a state object that then you build your current navigation state based on a kind of your own custom state. But it doesn't really scale. It doesn't really work in practice. Like even for a simple demo app, you end up with so much code and having to kind of implement lots of really boring boilerplate code. It just ends up in a bit of an unmaintainable mess, frankly. It just doesn't feel at the kind of level that most Flutter APIs give you. Almost all of Flutter is so wonderfully easy to use and composable, and then the Navigator 2.0 stuff just isn't. I just don't think they had time maybe to implement a really developer friendly API. I think it is much more, it feels much more low level and like direct interaction with the different systems. But at the same time, it's very flexible. It has allowed me and other people to build on top of it. And it is very complicated the way it has to support all the different platforms that Flutter supports is really, really, that was a challenge. And they've done a really good job of kind of abstracting those, that bit they nailed. So, yeah.
Yeah, and no way do I doubt, like, I understand that handling like the web and this kind of like, I'm, you know, I do a lot of websites. So like, I understand that like at any point, at any time, like you could be at any website, right? It's very, I don't know what you can call that. There's no single entry point like you have like with a mobile app. So that makes sense. But at the same time, it's like, I just wish there was a little bit more, like you said, developer friendly kind of stuff, because like Flutter is supposed to kind of say, okay, you know, it doesn't really matter if you're from, you know, what kind of background you're from, you can do this. And I think that everybody can, but then the problem is like, like you said, that Navigator default one is just not, like you said, friendly enough for people to understand. And like you have to reach for a package. Now the question is, which package do you reach for? And it seems like people are going towards Go Router now. I think Go Router is now supported. Now, when I say supported, I mean like it's taken over. It's been taken over by the Flutter team or Flutter, what do you call those kind of people?
Yeah, it's kind of like being maintained now by the Flutter team itself. Yeah. Yeah,
which is pretty interesting, right?
It is. It is.
I guess that maybe I can kind of roll this back, right? I looked at the Routemaster and I felt like it was an interesting mix of, and it kind of reminded me of Go Router to a little bit. And it also reminded me of, what's the other one that's really famous right now? Is it with the B, right?
Beamer.
Beamer. Yeah. That's the one. I felt like it was an interesting mix of that, but that was just my feeling, right? Like, how would you describe Routemaster compared to those two libraries? Because I think those two are probably the most popular at the moment. Maybe I'm wrong.
Fundamentally, they all do the same job, and they do it in slightly different ways, but they all are very similar. Routemaster, I think the main thing with it is the support for kind of nested navigation and tabs. I like to think that it does a very good job at making that kind of very easy. In terms of it maybe does a bit more management itself than the other frameworks, but I know the Flutter team are working on improving that in GoRouter. So yeah, like I tried to make it really, really simple to implement nested routing, tabs. Routemaster will create things like the tab controller for you and just manage that and just hand that to you, and then you can just use that to implement your tabs. As far as I know, none of the other routing packages do. But yeah, like they all do things. It's like state management, right? They all end up doing the same job of managing state. It's just slightly different ways of doing it. And they're all great. Like you know, it feels weird because like I'm, you know, proud of what I've made, and I like to think I'm very proud of certain parts of it. But all of these packages are great, and all of them will get the job done. I do feel it's maybe a little bit of a shame that we have ended up like there was so many good contributions from the community around Navigator 2.0, and kind of now we've kind of almost by accident ended up with GoRouter being part of the core kind of Flutter team's work, because Chris Sells developed it, Chris Sells then left Google, and so the Flutter team are now maintaining it. So it does feel like in a slightly weird position now that kind of we have something which is sort of part of the Flutter framework and sort of not. But I still think it's valuable to have other packages like Routemaster there to do things maybe a different way slightly and offer different opinions on how to do things.
Yeah, I mean, in the end, like, how do I say it? I feel like Provider is used by a lot of people, but more on the beginner. Like later on, people usually switch to RiverPod. So like, even though Provider is kind of the package that the Flutter team kind of recommends, it seems like people are still going to move on to RiverPod, Block, or something else. So I feel like a little bit at that stage where it's like, okay, if you don't know what to choose Go Router. Why? Because, you know, it's run by the Flutter team. And then maybe if that just doesn't fancy you, right, maybe you could switch to, like you said, Routemaster, if that makes more sense to you, or you know, whatever makes more sense to you. I guess if you, I mean, yeah. Anyways, your app, right? Your what do you call that? Your package, right? How did you manage to pick up all this stuff for Nav 2.0? Like, what did you read? Because like, is it just the documentation about it? I mean, the only things I could find was like a couple of videos about how to use it raw, and I was completely turned off. And then there was a video done by, I can't remember his name now. He runs, I think, the Flutter group in UK. He did a really nice video about it too. I wish I could remember his name at the moment. But like that was basically all I could find. So I think there was actually a long blog post too when it came out too.
Yeah, I mean, how I learned it was by implementing it, frankly, because we were doing so the Moi project that I mentioned. So that is kind of maybe our flagship kind of Flutter project that we've done here. And as I say, it was one of the first. I don't actually know of another project that was kind of like a commercial mobile app that was brought to web before Moi. I'm sure someone can tell me otherwise, but I couldn't find one at the time. So it did feel like we were being quite adventurous with Flutter Web. And so we needed to add Navigator 2 support. We wanted to support URLs and direct linking and back and forward and everything like that. And so the way I learned it was simply by using it and trying to implement it in the app, and then giving up, frankly, because it wasn't workable. I remember like I had been using it for, I don't know, a week or two, kind of on and off, trying to implement it, and I was just like, this is unworkable, and it took me a little while to get to that point, because I was like, really, am I saying that like a bit of Flutter just doesn't really doesn't work, or isn't friendly enough to use, that's for sure. Like, yeah, we could have made it work, but it would have just ended up in so much code. So that's kind of how I had to figure it out that way. And I did get it working using just the raw router APIs, but I was just like, there has to be something better. And at that point, none of the other routing packages worked how I wanted them. None of them really supported tabs or nested navigation. And so I had to figure out how to do that. And yeah, it was painful. It took a long time, like many evenings, trying to figure out how to integrate with the APIs. But yeah, got there in the end.
Do you mind to kind of give like a quick introduction about the different pieces, right? So I know there's like a router delegate. I'm trying to remember whatever pieces there are. Do you mind to kind of talk about that for a moment?
Oh yeah, see if I can remember them all. So yeah, you've got a router delegate, which is kind of the main bit of the routing system, which gets notified of URL changes from the system, and then there is a parser as well, which sits on top of that, which intercepts URLs, and then that can parse the URLs into your own custom like objects. So it can take a URL and then like transform it into some kind of like model object or state object. And what's the third object? I'm now trying to remember. Like this is how complicated the system is that I can't remember all the different pieces. So you have so the delegate's job is to then on URL change to update the actual the navigator stack. So that generates somehow an array of pages, and then updates the master navigator using that. And yeah, well, those are the two main bits of the system. They're the two bits that you need to pass to the app in order to make it work. But yeah, one of the reasons I think it's so complicated is that it was built on top of the original Navigator API. So you've kind of, and they needed to keep those as a backwards compatible thing. And so adding the Navigator 2 to the existing Navigator was difficult. And like, there are some weird things like where if you provide a pages list to Navigator, it will then throw an exception if you don't provide another parameter for dealing with page pops. And that also doesn't feel very Flutter-like, right? Of just having like random runtime errors when you forget a parameter. So I think that really, really added to it just having that not feeling very Flutter-like. But it's all this kind of like, it's all bundled together. And if you go and look at the like Navigator source code in Flutter, it is really complicated the way that it has to support the classic Navigator route and Navigator 2.0. It's I don't want to say a mess because it's kind of like there's no other way they can do it with having it use the same Navigator and be backwards compatible. But it's a lot of code, that's for sure.
Okay, so it's actually built on top of the existing Nav 1, you're saying, but adding a little bit more kind of like, I guess, what do you call that? Like some kind of logic in between the user who's writing the code and the actual Nav? Okay.
Yeah, so like as well as the root delegate and the parser and all kind of that bit and the bit that communicates with the operating system, then so the main other addition as far as Flutter developers are concerned is that the Navigator takes a pages list of pages objects, and Navigator internally has to will use that page list, but then you can also push into the same Navigator the classic routes. So it has to kind of manage both of those. So you can have 3 pages from the new routing API, and then you can push a dialog using Navigator push, and it deals with them both in the same Navigator object. And so that leads to a lot of complication in the internal Flutter framework. But yeah, it is all compatible with each other, which is, quite an achievement. I'm sure that took a lot of design work to figure out how to do that.
Yeah, but like you said, I mean, if you had to keep something backwards compatible, that could be like a mess, right? I think Java has a lot of that kind of baggage.
Yeah, and generally Flutter, I think, has been managing backwards compatibility. I mean, I don't want to say perfectly because I don't think there is a perfect in terms of backwards compatibility, but I think they've been managing it better than any other framework I have ever used. The way that they kind of deprecate things and then remove things, I think, is great. I think it's pretty essential. I completely understand why some other companies, I'm thinking particularly of Microsoft here, who tend to keep things incredibly compatible. I mean, you can look at kind of how old the apps are that you can still run on Windows, but that requires never removing APIs, and that ends up with messiness in terms of developers. And I think the Flutter team are doing an awesome job at deprecating things kind of intelligently, cleaning stuff up, having like the Flutter fixes that will automatically upgrade code is just brilliant. Like, that's just genius. If you can remove APIs but have developers basically never have to care about them, then like that's just ideal. And yeah, I do wonder if maybe it would have been a better idea to not. I don't know. It would have been really difficult to do it any other way as well. So like there's loads of trade-offs here. But yeah, there's a lot of complication. I would not have I would not have wanted to design this system myself. Like I think the Flutter team did a really, really good job at coming up with something that integrates with the existing Navigator without disrupting it. It was then just kind of the cherry on top of having a easy to use API in terms of end developers that was the thing that was missing.
Yeah, so pretty much, like I said, I think it's just like if you want to use Nav2, you have to use a package unless you want to tear your hair out.
Yeah, I would not recommend going near the actual kind of raw APIs. No, I would absolutely, the way I've said is just go and have a look at the packages, have a look at the APIs. They all are kind of fairly similar. There are some differences, like there are some packages which use code generation to generate routes, and if you like code generation, then great, go that way. There are some packages which offer kind of different options and more flexibility in how they work. So just have a look at examples and see what you like and use them. They'll all do the job. So yeah.
definitely. I guess it depends. Like I said, it depends on what you like to do.
Yeah.
And I feel like fundamentally they're about the same, but there is some difference between the two. Like you said, yours has got definite tab interest to it, which is interesting. I never really thought too much about using URLs for tabs, but yeah, of course you can do it. Just that didn't really come to my mind when I thought about that.
Yeah,
but, yeah. And then actually when I saw the examples, like I was like, well, how does this thing work with the tabs? Like I can see the paths and it didn't make sense to me. And then like after I scrolled down some more and I was like, oh, okay, you got a tab controller and then you can do it that way. Okay. Smart. Interesting.
And part of that came out of an original requirement on Moi. Was quite complicated, where we had, we have a clearly responsive design between desktop and mobile, and we wanted different tab bars on both. So we wanted to use a Cupertino tab bar on mobile, but then a different kind of custom tab bar on desktop, and like we needed to sync them up so that if you resize a browser window and you're on the second tab, when you resize it, you're still on the second tab. And that was, that was really challenging. That was one of the original things that was just making me with the kind of base API just tear my hair out. So don't do it.
But what actually I want to talk about is like, okay, I think in terms of, if you're looking at like stats, I think Beamers may still be the number one for some reason.
Yeah.
And I think Go is catching up, Go Router. There's also Auto Route, and then of course there's yours. But we just had the Google I/O event, right? And we were just talking before the show that they announced, one of the companies announced that they're using, actually I didn't see the announcement yet. You're talking about it. I think they announced their app, and then did they actually say that they're using your routing package, or they did say they're using it?
Yeah, so Superlist announced that they're kind of launching their preview version at I/O. And this is one of kind of the first big desktop apps written in Flutter. And I've been working with them, doing some work to help them with the Navigator 2.0 stuff. They had some really quite complicated Navigator requirements that have required changes to Routemaster. So that's been great working with them and then being able to work on my open source project. And yeah, so I work with them to basically help them implement Routemaster into their product. They were using kind of the original Navigator 1 when we started, and needed to add deep linking support and other various Navigator challenges. And yeah, I first worked with them last year, and then they had a new navigation design, a kind of a new iteration of it that then had some even bigger challenges in it. And I worked with Iero, who works for Superlist, and we sat down in a room together here and kind of I made some changes to Routemaster and he made changes to Superlist, and we worked together, and it was a lot of fun. And the end result is just beautiful. Like and like I did help implement it, but I certainly didn't design it. And the animations are just gorgeous, and like there's not much like that on desktop apps. It's just like, it really shows kind of the power of Flutter of doing like really, really cool animations on desktop. So yeah, it was a lot of fun to do that.
I'm kind of curious though, like, so how did they find out about Routemaster? Like, what actually made them choose that one compared to the other packages out there? Like, because the space is starting to get a little bit crowded, right?
Yeah. It's a good question. I think it might have been Iero, because he used to work for Codemate, where I work now. I think it was probably through him that I ended up doing kind of like just doing a talk with their team about Navigator 2.0 and that kind of thing. And it just went from there, that they were, kind of, okay, can you give us a hand with implementing this? And I was like, sure, and I was going to use Routemaster because I built it, and I had to make some changes then as well. There was some, I can't remember quite what, but there were some like tweaks and features needed. It was the history stack. Yeah, we needed to add a full history stack. I'm not sure if the other routing packages really have support for that or not. But that required that was complicated because of syncing up between the web browser and other platforms. Superlist doesn't support web, but Routemaster needs to support all the other all the platforms together. So yeah, that was an interesting challenge to add that. Yeah, that's how it came about.
Wait, hold on. Did you just say that Routemaster initially didn't support all the different platforms?
No, it does. It just it's just that when I needed to add things for Superlist, I needed to add them kind of for web as well, just to support the different platforms. So yeah, Routemaster was built for web primarily, but it comes in use a lot, even if you don't need web support and URL support, like for deep linking, because deep linking is verging on impossible to do with the original Navigator. It's really, really difficult. You end up having to do really horrible hacks in order to make it work. So like that's another thing with Navigator 2. People associate it with web, and it is really important for that, but it has a lot of use on mobile and desktop as well.
I mean, if you think about it, web, I mean, kind of is all about deep linking, right? It's like you have to go to this long URL every single time.
Yeah. And actually, it's interesting because like, even if you don't need direct linking support, even if you don't think that's particularly important, all of a sudden you realize you do when you just need the forward button to work, because Flutter will work with the back button kind of without doing Navigator 2. But then all of a sudden you're like, wait, hang on, I want the forward button to work, but then you need a URL to go to, because otherwise you've got nowhere to go forward to. So it's just literally supporting the forward button that then means you need kind of Navigator 2 and supporting URLs.
Yeah, actually, that's kind of like the weird thing that kind of was hard for me to understand. Like for that one, like you actually, so how do I say this? When I was playing with the raw router, I think I had to, you had to build up your own routing stack or something. There's a routing stack of material pages. Is that right?
Yeah.
And then that one will control the back and forward buttons, I believe, at least the back button.
Yeah, so it's kind of the...
so like you just like the route did pop, and then that one you can like remove a variable, and from the variable that you unset to null or whatever, then you could say, okay, then don't include this. That was the tutorial that I remotely remember.
Yeah, so the end job of all the router packages is to create a list of page objects, which then have your widgets for those pages. So yeah, on a pop, what you would do kind of with the original plan for Navigator 2 is that you would, so you'd get the pop message from the OS. You would then take your kind of state, your like global Navigator state object, and you would do something to that. It would depend on what your app does. But for example, they had a kind of example bookstore app. And so there was like a selected book ID property. And so like if you were looking at a book and it popped, you would then like set that to null. And then you would go, okay, this state has changed. And then based on that state, you would then generate the list of pages, which, you know, if there was a selected book, you would have the book page. And like, it just, you know, the fact that I'm having to talk about so many steps just to explain it just shows you kind of how complicated and unwieldy it is. So yeah.
Yeah, and that's the part that like makes it so complicated to me. Like for sure, as we talked about before, like I don't see a way that you could directly use this and be sane, because you're not just doing simple like index and then like what would I call a show page where you have to go to like a specific book in this case and see that and pop it. No, you're going to have all kinds of different options for any kind of well-used app, right? So it's like, I don't understand how this thing by itself can be sustainable without a package, because it just doesn't make sense to me.
It just isn't. Like it fundamentally isn't. And you know, all of the I'm pretty certain that basically all the router packages use URLs under the covers. And ultimately that's, you know, the main thing which I kind of just like was what was the state object, because fundamentally, if you're in a web browser, you already have a state of the current Navigator stack, and that's the URL. That's the source of truth, right? So if you have a source of truth, why are you then building another one? You're taking that source of truth, splitting it up, trying to figure something out, and then building a state object based on that. And that makes no sense. And I think it is, you know, I think one of the biggest kind of code smells in the world is having two sources of truth. And yeah, like that was just like, why are we not using the URL here to build up just build it up directly? Why are we going through all of this process of reading the URL and then the other thing is you've got to do it back the other way, so that when you navigate to a new page in the app, you then have to update your state object, and then based on your state object, you have to rework out what the URL is supposed to be based on that state. And it's just like, okay, well, why don't we just push a URL in the first place and then build it based on that, which is just so much simpler. Yeah.
So then if you're not using selected book method, I'm kind of curious about how does it work underneath? Is it just like a stack and you just keep adding things to the back?
Yeah. So, do you mean we're like going backwards and forwards?
Yeah, something like that. Because like we just talked about, right? I'm trying to think of how it went. I think there was like 2 routes, and then like if you hit select a book, then it was like another route at the bottom. Yeah. And obviously, if you press the back button, then that would just unselect the book. You'd have a null selected book, and it would say, okay, don't attach the detail page, right? Yeah.
So like in a web browser, you'd press the back button. It would just it would just be like, you've gone back to this URL and you need to update the state object based on that. And then, the same kind of thing within, like if you called navigator.pop, you would have the same kind of thing of having to update the state object in the same way. But yeah, it's just not maintainable. And the amount of code that it required for a very simple demo app, like when you go to even, the My app it's not massive, but it's got 5 tabs or something. And it wouldn't have been maintainable. It would have been an absolute horrible nightmare to maintain.
So am I giving you nightmares for tonight then? If I keep asking about these kind of things?
giving me flashbacks to trying to implement it. Yeah. Yeah. It was confusing. It was like, okay, here's how you're supposed to do it. And I had got so used to, with Flutter being, okay, great, that's how you do it. That makes sense. And this was the one place when I was just like, what? No, that doesn't make any sense. I can understand what the thoughts were when someone was designing it. They were kind of like, the way Flutter works of having a global, if you have, say, like a global state for your pages and then it's reactive in reacting to that state object, it was trying to kind of copy that, I think, of okay, we have a global navigator state and we build the pages based on that. But yeah, it's much easier to just have a global state of a string of a URL and just go based on that. It's so much simpler.
Yeah, that does make sense. Okay. And how do I say this? So Routemaster is being used by Wunderlist, right? You work with them. What kind of feedback did you get from them? Like, I'm guessing it must be really valuable, right? That you guys worked together on this one, and you made quite a few changes, right? So what kind of feedback did they give that you decided to make changes about?
Yeah. It was me implementing the Navigator most of all. So it was kind of feedback to myself, I guess. And it was a great challenge. It was really good fun because I kind of looked at their Navigator requirements and I was like, right, well, can Routemaster do this? I don't know. It's really difficult to design APIs when you're kind of making a package as generic as doing like Navigator stuff or kind of state management stuff, because you've no idea what people's requirements will be in the future. And so it was a lot of fun taking their requirements and going, right, will my thing do it? Did I design the API in a flexible enough way that it will work for this use case? And like mostly it did. It required a few additions of like, providing global back and forward support in non-web platforms. That's what the main thing. On the web, obviously the browser manages the back and forward state based on the URL, but I had no support for kind of a history stack with a forward button on desktop or mobile, because I hadn't needed that, and apparently no one else had. So I had to add stuff like that. But I was pleasantly surprised that like how I have never designed like a package as generic as Routemaster before, and I spent a long time thinking about how to make it flexible and how to make it work for lots of different use cases. But it was just sort of imaginary. It was just guessing. It was just looking at kind of various popular apps, like kind of trying to think of that, of like, okay, what would that app need in order to do their navigation? So yeah, they were happy. I implemented the stuff. Did it, you know, it was, well, I was also very pleased with their code base that it was very easy to do so. It was very pleasing that it was easy to swap out all their kind of like Navigator 1.0 with Navigator 2.0 and Routemaster stuff. So yeah, it was fun and very rewarding. And then yeah, the same thing more recently when like they had new requirements, which again required changes to Routemaster for some really kind of like cool animations and flexibility around that, which was even more of a challenge. But yeah, we got there and it was fun.
When you say routing for the animations, how does that work? Is it just that like you're listening for route changes and then like when that happens you do an animation, or what do you mean by that exactly?
Yeah, so they kind of have this like stacked card layout. You can see it in the video from like the Flutter keynote at I/O. So they have kind of a main page, and then you can click a link, and it will push another card in from the right, and it will do a really nice kind of like motion design animation. And the main issue with that is that the Navigator and like we're not really talking about the Navigator 2.0, the routing side of things. The actual Flutter Navigator, even with the old just like Navigator.push stuff, it's really primarily designed for full screen routes because that's where it came from with, you know, supporting mobile. So supporting things like side by side routes, it is really, really challenging there. And that required a lot of thinking about how to do that, how to support that, various different like trade-offs between ideas. Yeah, it's interesting. It's an interesting limitation of the Navigator, that it's really, really designed for like full screen routes, and doing routes of things which are like side by side or split screen are very, very difficult with the classic Navigator. But yeah, have been adding stuff to Routemaster. Haven't released that stuff yet, but I will get to it. Need to finish like things like documentation and tests for it. But it's yeah, that was really rewarding just to see the end result, because it looks so cool. And yeah, it's I'm like I am really, really excited about Flutter on desktop. I think it's going to create some really, really cool apps, and kind of I think it will really raise the game of desktop apps. We have a lot of really beautiful mobile apps, and you know, not just written with Flutter, also React Native and native ones, which you know, have really cool transitions, really cool animations, that kind of thing. But that kind of thing hasn't happened as much on desktop. Particularly with cross-platform stuff. And I think we're going to see a lot of that kind of thing with Flutter for desktop. I'm really hoping so, of people just going, oh, that's cool. That's not what, you know, you'd struggle to do that in Electron or even like with the native APIs. So yeah, I'm looking forward to that, seeing what people build.
But now you're just making the developer job much more complicated, right? Because, I mean, there's some setup for doing this kind of stuff, right? For like animation controller, all this kind of stuff that you have to do. It's not so bad, but I still think it's not like straightforward, right?
No, it isn't. It isn't. And I think that's probably something that actually we can do a better job of in Flutter, either through the community or in Flutter itself. I feel that I felt this for a while that like the Navigator, the animation APIs are a little hard to use sometimes, and like it's really hard to write kind of declarative code. Like I feel like there's room for like a declarative animations package almost, of like you can more describe your animations rather than kind of having to do the like, you know, just calling the animation controller methods, because it gets really, really complicated, and doing like really cool effects does take a lot of work and a lot of thinking about. Particularly, you know, if you start thinking about like interrupting animations, that kind of thing, of like if you're halfway through an animation, then the user presses the back button and you don't want to like have the animation jump around, that kind of thing can really, really add to the workload there. So I feel like there's room for better APIs there. But I'm just saying that I haven't tried to design any. So, and I'd love to know if there are any examples like in other frameworks, other development platforms of like more declarative or fluent packages or APIs for animations. I think that could be really interesting way of going for animations.
Yeah, but all those, like, there's surprisingly a lot of these, what I like to call like animated X kind of widgets, like animated opacity, animated position. I think there's so many of these animated X kind of widgets.
Yeah.
I was actually quite surprised. Like I started going through Andrea's tutorials. He had a cloud course. I bought that one about animations. Of course, just like me, buy the course, buy the book. Maybe I read it the first 2 pages and I never get back to it.
I know that feeling. Yeah.
The first lesson was all about like those, like I said, animated X widgets. And I was like, wow, there's actually a lot. And he did a quick example. I was like, you could do a lot with this. Yeah. I'm really surprised.
Yes. So yeah, they're the implicitly animated widgets, which kind of are more what I'm talking about here, of like they deal with the animation controller kind of behind the scenes themselves, and just look for changes on the widgets. When you update the widget, they figure out the animation they need to do. And so I feel that maybe we could do more of that, of being able to compose those kind of things. And particularly when you get to like using different staggered animations and curves, of maybe, I don't know, of like having more, maybe it just needs more widgets, right? Like even more widgets, make everything composable. But yeah, there are a lot of them. I sometimes find out there's one I, didn't know about. Like, I don't know, do you have the same thing of like every month you find out about a Flutter widget you've never heard about, and like, what? How long's that been there? Oh, 4 years. Okay, great. Like there's so many of them. Yeah, like, what was it? I actually kind of felt embarrassed one time because like I thought I was a little bit of a Flutter expert compared to some other people, around me at least. Like, of course, you're much better than me. I can't wrap my mind about 2.0. But in any case, like I hired this guy. He's only been doing Flutter for about a year. I've been doing it for about 2 years plus. And we had this thing where we had to put like a carousel in the background, right? And when you went to swipe, but we had to put this text in the middle, and then when you swipe over the text, it wasn't working. So I was like, let me think about it. I had some idea about how to do it, but then there's actually a widget so there's a widget you could wrap around a widget, and it basically will let you like touch through it. So it's still there, it still takes up space, but like it'll touch through it when you touch it, which is exactly what we needed. I forgot what it was called, but I was like, all right, there's too many widgets. And for this case, it's good, right? Because you find these random widgets that you really want to use. Yeah, and it's an interesting difficulty with Flutter, I think, of how we do have so many widgets. Like I've no idea how many there are in the framework itself, but the discoverability of them is difficult. And with other frameworks, when you kind of have like... I'm thinking of like, if you have properties on objects, so like if you have directly properties on, I can't think of a good example, but like, if every single layout widget has a padding property, that's really discoverable. But like knowing that there is a padding widget that you can add, well, okay, I think everyone learns that fairly early on in Flutter, but I think that's kind of an interesting trade-off with kind of the way that Flutter does it with composability of having to learn about the different widgets and know what is available is really difficult. And I'm not sure what we could do there to like particularly help learners and beginners to find out what the widgets are. There is the widget catalog, but still there are so many of them. It's really difficult.
Yeah, it was bugging me. I was trying to find out what is the name of that widget that lets you swipe through it, but I don't have the... Maybe I'll try to find it later, but very nice. Yeah. And I think there's even more widgets, right? Which I actually didn't even know about this until I watched a very quick video about Flutter 3. Like you have that specific platform widget. I forget what they call it, but it definitely had the word platform in it, where you could do the menu navigation for desktop. That's huge, right? I was like, yes. Wow, I didn't think they could actually solve this problem, but they managed to solve it.
Yes. It's great that they've added that. That's kind of like there's been like a that code hanging around in a Git repo for ages, but I really like the way that they've implemented it for desktop menus, and doing that kind of stuff well is so critical to like Flutter coming to desktop, that it gets things like doing the native menus right, and I think they've done a really good job there. It looks really good, the API.
Yeah, I'm starting to wonder if maybe this is IgnorePointer or something. It's going to bug me for a while until I figure it out.
Yeah.
Are you looking it up too?
I'm just looking. Yeah, IgnorePointer is and then there's like there are other settings on like gesture recognizers for like the hit test behavior as well. But yeah, there's lots of them. Like I've had that of like forgetting a widget name. It makes me feel old that like I'm like, there's a widget that does this. What's it called? I forgot. I've used it before.
Yeah, that's the one. It should be that one. I probably have a different name, but yeah, IgnorePointer. In case you guys wanted to know what this one is at home, it basically takes away what they call the hit area, right? So that way you don't actually touch it, but it's still taking up space.
Yeah.
It sounds a little bit useless, but then when you need it, it's so useful.
Yep.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I think I'm still like not even sure which kind of routing platform I want to use. I feel Beamer is nice, but a little bit kind of complicated. I'm curious to see how your stuff works right now that I know it works very well in a desktop app. I may take a look at that one, because these days I think desktop apps are a little bit more in demand all of a sudden, right? Because of this. But actually what else popped into my mind about desktop apps is like, Flutter's kind of interesting, because it's like they really push that you can have your own kind of app, but at the same time they're like, oh, but if you want that Windows look, we have this package. If you want that Mac look, we got this package. If you want that Linux look, there's this package.
Yeah. Yeah. I think this is really interesting. I was actually talking about this with Peter on my Flutter podcast. If I to do a little plug for Flutter Twattle, which is our brand new Flutter podcast, but we were discussing which, by the way, is a much less professional podcast than this. We are just two British guys talking complete nonsense. So it's good that we also have proper podcasts like this, actually discussing things seriously. But we were just talking about how on mobile, it feels like it matters less about using native components. At least that's my view on things, and I think most people's view on things, that there are people out there who really believe that an iOS app should all look like iOS, and all the button should be an iOS button. Although increasingly Android and iOS just basically look the same, right? They look really, really flat and not much different. But then on desktop, it feels like people care more, and I care more about something feeling native, and having the actual native components there. And I'm not quite sure why that is. I don't know, but yeah, like it's interesting having that flexibility. And I haven't really looked at, I know there's like the Mac OS package for the UI controls. Like I had a quick glance at them, and they look great, and look like they do a really good job of reproducing the native look, which is what we need, right? Because if you have widgets which like, I feel like it's much better to have a completely custom UI than a UI that is almost like the Mac or the Windows UI, but like not quite, and it feels like a little bit wrong. So yeah, I think that's interesting as to like how people will take that. Like, so like Superlist has gone for a completely custom design, which will look the same as far as I know, like across platforms. But It'll be interesting to see if people make really responsive apps between the platforms, of having a Windows style drop down and a Mac style drop down. I think that'll be interesting to see how that works, and like what problems that causes, if they're different sizes, like dealing with layouts changing. But it does feel like on desktop, I want things to feel native, and like kind of the built-in apps more. But yeah, I don't know quite why that is.
Well, I think the one thing that we need to have is like when you click the X, and on Mac, right? You click the X and the app is still running, right? Everybody needs that.
Absolutely, yeah. They've all got to like feel the same, right? They've got to have the platform, the important platform differences like that. And if they don't have that, I don't think there's any point in bringing stuff to the desktop if it just doesn't work like the other apps. So yeah, it's been massively confusing. But yeah.
So we have a couple of people on YouTube asking some questions, and one is about. There's actually two people talking about GoRouter. One guy asked about if GoRouter has deep link support, and another guy asking about what are your views about GoRouter? I think they're kind of similar, right? Mm-hmm. So do you have any views about GoRouter and how it works with deep link?
I mean, I haven't used it, but I've looked at the API, and yeah, it seems to work the same as other routing packages of taking a URL and spitting out pages. But I'm not going to pretend to be an expert in GoRouter. Haven't used it myself. I've read the documentation, which is really good. Chris did a really, really good job at writing documentation for it. But all of the routing packages will support deep linking. That's like a very, very basic thing that they need to support. So yeah.
Yeah, and I guess any further views on GoRouter? I know people are curious. I mean, you're the routing expert now.
I'm not sure I'd quite call myself that, but yeah.
You are the Routemaster, right?
Well, yeah. I slightly regret using that name. It comes from the classic old London buses, which were called Routemasters, and I was like, okay, cool. I'll use that. But yeah, that's the package. Definitely not me. GoRouter, it does the same thing but slightly different ways. There's some of the API I don't like as much. It's really picky things, right? You with all APIs, there's like little naming things that you're like, oh, I wouldn't have named that way, but they do the same things. I know that GoRouter at the moment doesn't really support nested navigation from what I've seen that well, but there is a design document on how they're planning to add that to GoRouter. And yeah, I hope that we have this kind of I hope that it doesn't end up just being GoRouter and all the other packages just kind of fade away because no one wants to use them. I think that would be a really big shame. And it's, I do feel that it's a bit I kind of said this earlier, and I find it, I don't know, a bit difficult to kind of say, there were so many good routing packages already. It kind of feels like it's a bit sad that the Flutter team maybe didn't work with open source community and maybe use some of those if they were, but it's all kind of been an accident that the GoRouters ended up as part of Flutter. But it's kind of an interesting one that what am I trying to say? That kind of it's. I hope that people still look at the other packages and not just mine and don't just go, okay, that thing's made by Flutter. I'm going to use that. All of the routing packages are great and might do things in a bit of a different way. So yeah, I hope that people look at them all. And yeah, I can't really talk much more about GoRouter because I haven't implemented it myself, but it looks great. It looks like it does things the same but slightly differently, and I think that's good, and I think it's really good that we have like different competitions. So yeah.
Yeah, I know what you mean. I talked to Chris about this a while back, and I remember he said that they did do a very big study into the routing packages.
They did, yeah.
I didn't see the results get released. Maybe I didn't follow the right channel. Have you seen it or no?
Yeah, they generated a big report, which was really good. They did usability tests on, Routemaster wasn't part of that, but they did, because they had limited time, so they couldn't pick every routing package, but they did usability tests on the existing routing APIs of several different packages then, and it was a very interesting study. Like, it's on the UXR Flutter GitHub repo, which has got like different usability studies, and it's really interesting. They do they kind of got various developers to go through the different APIs and to see if they understood them. And they wrote a really interesting report, and I think API usability is a really interesting like research area as to making APIs which are clear to use and that people just understand them like based on names, even without reading the documentation. So yeah.
So when you read up on that, did you read up on anything and get some ideas, or were you like, "Oops, I did that too. Maybe I need to change that"?
I'm trying to remember. There wasn't. No, I don't think it was that much stuff. It tended to be very specific things to the individual packages, I think. I can't quite remember. But it was very interesting. It was really interesting seeing what people did understand or didn't understand based on the packages. But yeah, I can't remember quite what I took away from it. But generally, I mean, they couldn't pick a winner, right? That was like one of the ideas of this. Is one of them clearly much better than the others? And the end answer was no. Like they do things slightly differently, and all of them are really usable. So yeah.
Yeah, I think when I talked to Chris, I think he kind of gave that back, was like, there's no like single package that got it right. Everybody was just slightly off on something. Of course, there was some that were better than others, and yeah, so that was interesting. Yeah, that's kind of like, I like that Flutter's inclusive, but at the same time, like, you have to be careful about how inclusive you are. Sometimes it's like, if you leave things too open, it's like really Wild West, and maybe things go off in a really weird direction. But at the same time, you don't want to like cut off ideas, right? So it's because it's like, okay, I need to do deep linking. What should I choose? It's like it'd be great to have like, okay, this is the package, unless you have situation A. Okay, then choose this one. Something like that. Yeah.
And I don't think there are that many examples like that. Maybe like nested navigation is one of the big ones. Possibly like the kind of stuff I was talking about earlier of doing really complicated animation, particularly like side-by-side animation. That might be something that other packages might struggle with. Yeah, it's an interesting one, and it's a bit like state management, that I don't think there's any like right choice or wrong choice. You just got to see what works for you and what you prefer.
So do you think navigation will soon be similar to state management, where it's like, depending upon which navigation package you're going to use, people are going to flame you?
Oh, I said this last year that like navigation's the new state management. Yeah, like you can have arguments, maybe less so, because they kind of do work very, very similar in a very similar way than different state management solutions. But yeah, I think there'll be some lively Twitter debates. I've already seen a few about that. So yeah.
I must have missed this one. I haven't seen this one, but so Emma Weber has asked. This is more about Superlist. Maybe you know something about this one. She asked, do you guys know how Superlist got the tiling window manager implemented in Flutter?
What do you mean by the tiling window?
I'm getting old. Maybe my eyes are bad. Let's see. Hold on.
Like
TILING. Yeah. I'm not too sure what she means.
Like, do you mean like the side-by-side windows of like that, like appearing?
Okay. She specifically states at second 29. So it looks like you have like a sidebar, and then you have like the main part.
Yeah. So it's like when the card slides in. Yeah. So that's
it's a trifold, right?
Yeah.
Looks like a trifold in this one.
So that is like that is a Routemaster push under the covers. So it's just a like a navigator operation, and then it is that right hand like the cards bit is using kind of like a custom navigator that's actually I'm adding to Routemaster, so that will be a thing which I will release as soon as I can. And then lots of clever animation code that I didn't write that Eero did. Yeah, that's a navigator push, and Routemaster figuring out what needs to be added, and then animation code figuring out like what needs to be animated onto the screen. Yeah, it's a combination of that. But it does require this like custom. That's what I was referring to before when Navigator doesn't support full screen routes very well. So it would be really difficult. Like I don't think you could implement that without certainly with like Navigator 1, you just couldn't do it. That's required some playing around with like a custom Navigator object which doesn't actually use the real Navigator. But yeah, I will get around as soon as I can to releasing the custom Navigator in a Routemaster update that supports that. And I'll try to like add some kind of example that gives you an idea of, I mean, like obviously I don't think we're going to open source the entire navigation animations and everything there. That would be up to Superlist, but certainly like the core of it, I will do a Routemaster update, which will make that reasonably like apart from the animations, reasonably easy to implement yourself.
Okay, so what I believe she's talking about is like she specifically mentioned VS Code or something like that. So on the left-hand side, you have like what do you call that? Like a menu, and then you would click on something, and that would trigger a route, which on the right-hand side would open up that section, right?
Yeah. So it's just a set of pages. That is when you have two cards, it's just a navigator stack. So if you imagine on a mobile app, they would you wouldn't have them both appearing at the same time. It's just a navigator stack of two cards, two pages. And then rather than showing them full stream, they're shown side by side. So yeah, it's just like looking at the top level, whatever the current URL is, the current path, and then building up the list of pages, but then just sticking them on side by side with some horizontal scrolling. Okay,
so then left-hand side would be like what do you call that? Like a list view or something.
Yeah.
The right-hand side would be like a big container or whatever you want to draw it with.
Yeah, so like that's kind of like an example of like nested navigation, where like where there is kind of like a sub navigator for the actual pages, and and then there's kind of like a global navigator that while you're like the kind of basically remains static and just like draws the list view. So yeah.
Okay, got it. Yeah, our mutual friend has asked, have you found out about the expected behavior of the Android back button? Maybe I missed this joke.
Oh man, this is an interesting one. I did like a Twitter poll asking like a fairly simple question about how people think a navigation scenario should work on Android, and like it was basically 50-50 with quite a lot of votes between people what they thought it should do. Different Android apps do different things. This is when you combine it's with tab bars basically. So like it's where the back button should like move between tabs or like close the app or that kind of thing. So it's fun. I added some like options. So I actually, by the way, I haven't tweeted about this or anything. I actually released Routemaster 1.0 like 2 weeks ago, and I've been meaning to like tweet about it. So finally released 1.0. I felt that it got to like a stable enough place. And that's got some new options for how the Android back button interacts like with the history and with tabs. But it's so complicated. There are so many different scenarios as to, and like who would have thought that a back button could be that complicated, right? It's like one system button. And it really is. And different people think different things. So like, I think I originally had like a bug report of like someone going, it should work like this. And then I kind of made a change and someone else was like, no, it should work like this. And it's, I think there are more options I don't support yet, but it's massively, massively complicated. And like that you can then like combine the different options in different parts of an app and like whether it should, and when it should exit, if ever, or if it should prompt for things, or if it should like, you know, it's like if you go like from like tab 1, then tab 2, tab 3, tab 4, should it then, you press back, should it then go back to tab 3, then tab 2, then tab 1, and like how do you expect that to work? And then do you expect the same thing to happen on web with the back button there? And it just becomes a really, really confusing mess potentially. And if you do want differences between the different platforms, that's also really complicated. So yeah, fun.
Yeah, I remember using Android a while back. Like for me, the back button's just like you just pop the stack until you go to the very end. And then if you hit it again, then you exit the app. Like that's what I'm expecting as a typical Android user. I'm surprised that there's another way of thinking about this. But I do remember that like that was part of Android. Like you could reprogram that back button to different things. Yeah. It was like 1 out of 2, 1 out of 3 things you could do.
Even Google's own apps differ in their behavior when it comes to like the back button and tab bars. Some of them do one thing, some of them do another. So like even Google can't decide what's happening, which is a good indication of complexity. It makes me wish they had never added a system back button, but oh well, I have to live with it.
Okay, so Emma has asked a question is, will there be a blog post about the Routemaster-tiling window navigation, or will I be able to find it? Thank you for working on it.
I think, I'm not sure. Let's see what we can do on that. I can definitely add like an example to Routemaster of to kind of like point you in the right direction of how to do that kind of thing. But yeah, and it might be something that like maybe Eero wants to talk about with Superlist as to how we implemented it. And yeah, it was interesting like how we worked together as well on that. Like he did the animation stuff and I did the routing stuff, and like we kind of like not quite pair coded, but like sat across the table from one another, like working on similar things, and that was a lot of fun. That was a fun couple of days of getting it working.
Yeah, maybe I should bring him on the show to talk about this. I didn't know this is such a hot feature. It is interesting. I would love to. I need to watch this video after the show. I'm getting interested to check this out.
Yeah.
I think, to be honest, I think their app is kind of inspiring to make me want to build more desktop apps all of a sudden.
Yeah. Like, and I think looking at Superlist is super inspiring. Like it looks awesome, and like that kind of like animation and it does. Like the first time I saw like the demo of how that navigation was going to look, like I was just like, oh, this is cool. People are going to love this. So yeah, I'm kind of not surprised that people want to know how that's implemented and how that works. So yeah, we'll see what we can do.
Great. I think I kept you here for long enough, and it was great chatting with you. Is there anything else you wanted to say before we start to sign off? I think, if you have any more upcoming announcements, like, do you have an approximate date when the next, when Routemaster will get its update?
That's a good question. I hopefully, like in
when it's ready, right?
In the next month, like, it's hard to say, particularly when like it's like open source stuff that I'm working on in my own time. Soon, hopefully. I will. I'll tweet about it when it's ready. Shouldn't take too much work, but next few weeks.
So Emma, maybe take down his tweet handle. What's your tweet handle so we can follow you?
At Tom Gilder, Gilder. So yeah, at Tom Gilder.
Emma, so you know who to bother if you want to get some of that tiling goodness.
Start bothering me. But it's really kind of motivating when like people want this kind of thing and like want to know how things are implemented and like the end result. So yeah, that's really good to know. So I will try to get on that as soon as I can. Yeah.
Great. Well, again, thank you for your time. I really appreciate you coming on, and thanks for bringing this up to my attention. Like, it's so much stuff happened over the last few days that like I'm trying to figure out which things to watch, and it's several days, right? It's not just like 2 hours like an Apple event. It's like several days, several hours every day.
Yeah, I know, right? It's like an entire Netflix series to get through. But yeah, thank you very much for having me on. Really enjoyed it.
All right. Thank you.